Hi everyone, welcome to Get Well with Dr. Shel. I am Dr. Shalina Lalji, better known as Dr. Shel, and I know as a board-certified OBGYN and a functional medicine expert, your health is unique and deeply personal. It is a combination of genetics, lifestyle, and environment. Know this, no matter what your starting point is, you are never powerless over your health. Being on a health journey is a marathon, not a sprint. This podcast is about walking you through many different perspectives on health conditions, symptoms, and solutions that can help you get from fatigued to fabulous. My mission has always been to offer my patients and community the best of mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. You can learn more about me and my wellness center and schedule your telehealth appointment at drshel.com. We can support you no matter where you are in the world. This podcast is a powerful and simple way to carry the wisdom of thought leaders from around the world in your pocket and continue to develop your own healing journey every single day. So let the journey begin. Marcelle Pick is an OBGYN nurse practitioner who is passionate about transforming the way women experience healthcare through an integrative approach. Marcelle is currently a faculty member at the Institute of Functional Medicine, and she has served as a medical advisor to Healthy Living magazine. She lectures on a variety of topics, including weight loss resistance, infertility, stress and illness, and adrenal dysfunction. She is the author of several best-selling books, including Is It Me or Is It My Adrenals?, which we'll discuss today, and she's appeared on Dr. Oz, Fox, and her PBS special has been seen by millions around the world. Welcome, Marcelle. We are so excited.
Thank you.
So excited that you're here to talk about adrenals, stress, burnout, and how to navigate the challenges we're all facing right now. What a time to talk about the adrenals, right?
Yeah, more than ever before.
More than ever. Oh my gosh, stress is all around everybody now. So as I shared in your intro, you wrote a wonderful book called Is It Me or My Adrenals? Tell us what prompted you to write about this topic in particular.
You know, what I started seeing in my practice was so many people that were not getting better. And as I really dug into the research, what we don't talk about very often is because it's never talked about in the conventional world. Either you have a very serious condition of Addison's too little cortisol, or you have too much cortisol with Cushing's, and very few people have that. But what we now know more than ever before is that the adrenals are the master glands for almost everything. And when we think of the hormones, we think of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and they're not the master glands. The master glands are cortisol and insulin, and cortisol and adrenaline that come from our adrenals, and insulin that comes from food.
Yes.
So the stress that we have, whether it be present day stress or past stress, because the body doesn't know the difference, affects our hormones, affects our thyroid, affects our digestive system, affects our immune system. It affects every single system of our body. And without it, we can't function. But when we have too much of a good thing, it's a very bad thing.
Exactly. And, you know, it's like you and I have heard, and so has a lot of other people, stress is the silent killer. And we know that, you know, when you look at even the studies that were done with telomeres, right? What is the single thing that shortens the telomeres, which is that, you know, that piece of the DNA at the end of the DNA that gets shorter and shorter as we age. The single thing that shortens it the most is, ladies and gentlemen, stress, right? So I think it's definitely a very pertinent and very real topic that I'm really, really glad we're having this conversation, because patients that I'm seeing, especially since the pandemic, but really for decades before that, you know, I always ask them, one of the first questions I'll ask them, and I'm sure you do too, is on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you perceive your stress to be? And if they're in my office, by now they've already gone to 7 or 8 different practitioners and, you know, tried to use their insurance, much like what you know I'm talking about, because we're in the field of integrative functional medicine. They've already gone through and looked at all these, consulted with all these other practitioners. and they've never really been asked about the role of stress in their actual health and well-being. So let's talk a little bit about some of the surprising factors that can lead to adrenal fatigue. And before we do that also, please describe adrenal fatigue for the listeners who may not have ever heard of it.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. A lot of times people will say, I'm just exhausted. I wake up in the morning and I am exhausted. I slept all night, but I'm waking up tired. Or I'm just feeling very wired and I feel very anxious. Mm-hmm. Or I feel wired and tired. And there's really 3 different types of people. So you'll have those people that are very agitated because their adrenaline's up, their cortisol's up, or you'll see those people that are up and down, or you'll see those people that are just exhausted all the time. And those are all different parts of adrenal issues. Mm-hmm. It probably shouldn't be called adrenal fatigue. That's a kind of the adrenals get fatigued. Well, I don't know about that, but it's more adrenal dysfunction. And the reality is it's happening every day and it's been going on for years and years and years. Yep. More we're exposed to the television, to the riots, to the fires, to the hurricanes, to the pandemic, the worse it's getting for people because they feel like they have no outlet.
Right.
We're seeing people that can't sleep and they're even gaining weight and they're not changing their diet because they become insulin resistant because of the adrenal issues that they're having. So we have an epidemic in our country. There's no question about it. And we are seeing more and more people that my blood tests were normal. My practitioner said everything's fine. And then I look at their adrenals and they're, flatlined or they're just all over the place. And no wonder they feel so horrible. And no wonder they're starting to gain weight, even though they haven't changed their diet and they're exercising more than ever before.
And it's interesting. And I'm so glad you mentioned the weight. So 2 really big points that I want to make is, most people get blood tests done. So at the most, they might have a morning AM cortisol blood level, right? In our world, we do salivary cortisol levels, right? So we do a cortisol level where we're checking their cortisol at least 4 times during the day, morning, afternoon, evening, and bedtime, and sometimes even in the middle of the night when they're waking up. And what we're after, to just kind of shed a little bit more light on it, is a normal circadian rhythm where their cortisol should be highest in the morning and lowest at night. And to your point, when you say it might be way too high or it might be flatlined and way too low, and that's sort of at the stage of burnout, where they are just completely exhausted and just can't even get out of bed. And that's what we want to try to impact. We want to try to get to them and get them well and get their adrenals functioning again before they get to that stage, because truly, once you get to that stage, it takes a while to turn that around because it's taken them literally decades to get there, unfortunately, right? So 2 important points: make sure you're getting a salivary cortisol test done, and be sure that if you are, gaining weight or inability to lose weight and you've changed nothing, it really could be your adrenals because, like you said, Marcelle, insulin resistance. And, we explain it to our patients. You're always in a fight or flight mode. And so your body's going to hold on to that fat because that's not where it needs to put its energy. It thinks it's about to get, attacked, or it's on a deserted island trying to save, for no food. So it doesn't know the difference. The adrenals don't know the difference. So I think that's really a great point that you've made, that stress is stress. The adrenals doesn't know the difference, right?
Well, it doesn't know the difference between present day stress and past day stress. I mean, that's the problem. And a lot of times people will come into my office and say, but I don't, the world is good. I've got a good job. My kids are fine. And then I start asking questions, but what's your self-talk like? Yeah. What are your expectations of yourself? What are you anticipating you have to do in a day? And many women multitask. They're taking care of their children. They're taking care of their partners. They're taking care of a sick parent. They're taking care of friends. They're taking care of their job and themselves. Oh,
wait, what's that? What's that?
And forget libido because it's not there. And then sometimes they're eating on the run and sometimes they don't have time to exercise, or they're doing all the right things, but they're doing it with this pounding sense of, I've got to do this, I've got to go to the gym, I've got to do this. And that's not self-care. That's not really listening to the inner quiet. And we have 2 systems in our body. We have a parasympathetic and we have a sympathetic nervous system. Mm-hmm. The sympathetic nervous system is meant to fight and flight and do what it needs to do to get the day done. But the parasympathetic is the brakes for that. And unfortunately, with the electricity that we have now, with the TV that we have, the cell phones that we have, the smartphones, the computers, we don't ever shut off.
No,
So the body's
unfortunately.
always on go, 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 and it doesn't have the brakes to calm the system down so the adrenals have a chance to repair. And it's gotten worse over the last 50 years because we have so many expectations now. The average work week is what? 80 hours?
At least for most of us, right? Yeah.
That doesn't work.
No.
And the pandemic, mothers are having to homeschool.
Yeah.
Good job.
It's just gotten worse.
It's much worse.
It's just gotten worse. And I think that, to your point, if we're not taking time to be silent, we are not listening and taking care of that inner child. That inner voice is just suppressed by so many different things. And unfortunately, women specifically, we're super hard on ourselves. So, when you're pounding yourself about got to do this, got to do this, got to do this, it's those high expectations that we have of ourselves. And when you don't meet your own expectations, that's the worst kind of letdown. And that builds a lot of stress in your body. But also, you mentioned this quite a bit, and you talk about this, which I love, because recently we've all sort of started to learn this, that trauma plays a huge role in what happens to our bodies, whether it's our bodies developing chronic diseases. In our case, as you know, and a lot of my audience knows, my husband has ALS, and it's a very, very, very difficult disease. It's a neurodegenerative disease, much like MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. And as I have been in my practice, seen now lots of patients with neurodegenerative diseases, one of the first questions I do ask is, what kind of trauma have you experienced? So let's talk about that. How do you view trauma, and what is its impact on our adrenals? And is there a difference between a sort of childhood developmental trauma and the day-to-day trauma of what's happening now with this global crisis?
It's a great question. It's what I've spent actually the last 30 years of my career kind of looking at, because I've always been suspicious that we have things that are going on in us that really have biochemical changes, and most of them can be emotionally based. So if we look back at something called the ACE study, it was called the Adverse Childhood Events Study. It was done in 1998 with Kaiser Permanente and the CDC. And they looked to see if somebody had trauma in their lives. They felt unloved. There was a parent that died. There was a house fire. They had sexual abuse, physical abuse. There was an alcoholism, any of those kinds of things. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you answered yes to 4 of those questions, was there a health impact? Did it make any difference for your health long term? 19,000 men and women, middle-class America, and the answer was, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
We know that people that have a score of 4 only on that scale have an incidence 165% higher of addiction, heart disease, suicide, cancer, kidney disease. So it's the largest study in the history of medicine. There are still ongoing studies, and it's repeated over and over again, including obesity. So when we're looking at that, what we start to understand is, what is the reason behind that? Well, it's cortisol production. If you're in a traumatic situation, you pull your bootstraps up. You just get through it as an adolescent or a child. The problem is, many times that same noise, that same voice, that same situation, the same response that you had physically continues to respond until you deal with that trauma. Now, do you have to go into 10 years, 20 years of therapy? You don't, but you do have to recognize it, because the body doesn't know the difference between present day stress and past day stress. If you feel like you were being tased by a tiger back then, you're going to have the same response physiologically. Yeah. So what are the ramifications of that? They're huge. Just now, I teach for the Institute of Functional Medicine, and each year we go and we look at all the literature, because I teach hormones. And what we see now, we have the data to show that huge amounts of stress that are unresolved increase cancer risk, heart disease, kidney disease, and autoimmune disorders and immune issues. So
Mhm.
we've now connected all the dots. And it's no longer just in your head and you need to see therapist. It's
Mhm.
more, we have to have that person work it through in order to have that resolved so they don't have the biochemical changes that occur because of that trauma.
And you make a great point because, it is biochemical and it gets into what we call cellular memories. Our cells do not forget. There is cellular memories of that trauma that can impact you literally decades later. It can show up at sometimes the most inopportune time in the form of cancer, chronic diseases, autoimmune conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, etc. So one of the first layers that I ask my patients to try to start peeling is, let's really talk about this, right? I mean, unfortunately, most medical practitioners either A, don't have the time, and B, sometimes don't have the comfort level to really delve into traumatic situations. So much so that if something comes up, they might get a little uncomfortable and refer them to either a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist. Nothing wrong with that, absolutely, as long as it's being addressed. But I think it's very important for us as practitioners and for patients and the general public to really know that if there was something, that is something that needs to be dealt with. And it's the sooner you deal with it, the better it is. And there are so many ways of dealing with this, right? Like you said, you don't have to be in therapy for tens of years, but cognitive behavioral therapy is fantastic. Mindfulness is fantastic. Self-healing work with journaling, with just quiet time, with meditation, with doing things that actually bring that cortisol level down and allows you to get back in touch with yourself, I think are great things that I'm sure you recommend to your patients as well, right? You mentioned hormones. So glad that, we both share that passion, right? Being an OB-GYN, we share that passion because, gosh, such an important thing about us as women as well as men. Very, very important. Can you talk a little bit about how a woman's hormones affect her adrenal function and vice versa?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, the major hormones that we have are cortisol, which comes from our adrenals and too much stress, and adrenaline, the same, and then also insulin, because the body then responds with an insulin response if we have too much stress. Now, the interesting thing with that is that our famous hormone, cholesterol, that we talk about all the time, is one of the things that helps the generation and production of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA.
Mm-hmm.
If, however, it's called upon to make cortisol, which it will do at the expense of the other hormones, we're then driving more cortisol. There's this enzyme that gets blocked that doesn't allow then the production of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And the thing that we see, the first thing is that we see progesterone levels go down. And we see testosterone levels go down as well as estrogen levels. And that is in direct response to having too much stress for too long, because the body cannot live without cortisol and we have to have it to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing that people don't understand in the medical community, we never talk about that. We never talk about the relationship between that. Women know it. If
Yeah.
they're stressed out, their cycles go crazy.
Absolutely. Yes. More
Perimenopause.
hot flashes, more night sweats, more bleeding. Yep, everything.
But in the general population, what we say is hormones go up and down. There's, don't worry about it. They just, we don't have to test them. We don't have to do anything. Well, I'm here to tell you it's absolute baloney. We really know
Yeah.
that hormones get very affected by cortisol and the stress that we have. The
Yeah.
longer the stress that's been there without resolution, the more compromised the hormones can get. And then you can see dysfunctional uterine bleeding. You can see people that have problems with spotting in between cycles, with really bad PMS, with food cravings, with mood swings that are up and down all over the place. They can't do anything to really correct it. So we can do something, though. That's the part that's so exciting. They don't have to live that way. They don't have to have cramps with their periods. They don't have to have heavy bleeding so that they can't, go shopping with their girlfriends. We can actually do something about it, but we have to recognize that the stress components of our lives including physical stress. If you're sick and you have Lyme or a chronic disease, that causes, stress in the system as well with cortisol production. But it requires you to be intimately connected to yourself so that you know what you need to do to really come to resolution.
Absolutely. And those are some great points that you've made. And I think it's interesting, but also important to realize, and you mentioned this, a lot of practitioners won't test your hormones because it's just like, oh, well, you're going through perimenopause, this is going to happen, or you're only 35, there's no need to test your hormones, etc. You and I know we test our patients for hormones, as soon as there are any symptoms that we're seeing, we want to see what's going on with the hormones, including the adrenal hormones, of course. But, we want to make sure that we look at the estrogen, the progesterone, the balance. And I always say it's the balance that is really crucial. And if you're not balanced, you're going to end up with estrogen dominance, which is where you're going to see a lot of these symptoms, right, of mood swings and depression and bloating and weight gain and, irregular bleeding issues, et cetera, and maybe ovarian cysts and fibroids. And you kind of wonder, well, I don't have a family history of X, Y, and Z. But if you really look closely, the estrogen dominance could be leading to this. And then looking at testosterone levels going down, DHEA going down. And it's really like a symphony. I tell my patients it's like a symphony orchestra. And you've got to have all of these hormones playing very nicely with each other for it to give you this amazing, beautiful music. So you've got your sex hormones, you've got your adrenal hormones, like you've so very well talked about, and your thyroid hormones, which are incredibly important as well. And unfortunately, you and I both know that in the traditional world, we're not really looking at thyroid very closely, right? Most patients are just having a TSH drawn, and nobody bothers looking at, do they have Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune thyroiditis, thyroid antibodies, free T3, reverse T3, free T4, and how does it all play together? So maybe we can spend a little bit of time on saliva testing and blood testing for hormones, if you can comment on that, as well as the comprehensive approach to testing thyroid, and how do sex hormones, thyroid hormones, and adrenals sort of play together? How does that happen?
The first thing that I'm always going to be looking at is adrenals. That's kind of my trump card. And if I see that the adrenals are out of balance, I'm going to get them back into balance, and I might look at the other things in regards to that as well. And as we talked about, if you have too much stress, you're going to have less in the way of the hormone production. But as we get the stress a little bit more balanced, we might find that the body comes back into balance. Mm-hmm. And the thing that we so often see with adrenals is that we might see reverse T3, which is a hormone very few people check. And that's the brakes on the hormone. All the other numbers might look fine, but the brakes on the hormones are there because of cortisol. So the body doesn't behave as though it's got enough thyroid support. Mm-hmm. Now, we also know that people may have, and I'm going to be a little bit different here in terms of my explanation of this, is that we see that more and more people have too much iodine. Now, as a culture, we always talk about supporting iodine, which we might need to do, but too many people, because of the amount of salt that they're taking with iodine in it, or even some of the Himalayan salt, have high iodine amounts. And as we decrease the amount of iodine they have, their thyroid might come back into balance as well. And that's very interesting, newly kind of researched information, because we've always been talking about iodine, and some practitioners recommend 12 milligrams of iodine, which in my opinion is way, way, way too much. The recommendation generally is around, for many people, some people it's 500 micrograms, 3,000 micrograms, which is not very much. Yeah. That's something for people to be aware of, that sometimes need to have less iodine to support the thyroid. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that you can also change your diet after you've worked on the adrenals and done self-care, which is a tremendous amount of paying attention, and perhaps even doing breathing exercises, because some people don't like to meditate. Using heart math is a fantastic way to kind of get into that parasympathetic state, so that then that orchestra can happen that you described so beautifully, so we can have the ebb and the flow of the hormones that come into balance. And some people might need some replacement, and I do use them in my practice, but everybody's a little bit different. If we get everything balanced, then it comes, into fruition. And for those people that can't lose weight, then it's getting the body perhaps with keto or something else out of the insulin resistance so that the body can produce glucose properly and they can burn glucose appropriately as well. But everything's all balanced together.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have that balance, it doesn't work. If we have our sex hormone binding globulin that's too high, we have an issue and we need to bring it down so that the hormones can be available to the body as they should be.
Right. Those are great points. And I think it's so important to really look at the entire structure of how everything works together. We call it in our field, we call it the HPA axis, and really knowing how that HPA axis works with the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the adrenals. Would you explain that to the listeners? What is the HPA axis and why is it important? Why does it matter?
So if we don't have the appropriate crosstalk between the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenals, we have a system that gets out of balance. And because of that imbalance, we then have hormones that are out of balance, and people literally feel like they can't think clearly. They feel like they're gaining weight. They have brain fog. They are exhausted or they're moody, and they have incredible amounts of anxiety. And as a culture, if somebody has anxiety, what we'll say to them is, you might need an antidepressant. Mm-hmm. We might need some medication. The bottom line is many times it's because their cortisol is up too high, and that creates problems with respect to anxiety. Because if you get stopped by a police car, if anybody's ever had that experience, heart's pounding and you're feeling really anxious and your mouth is really dry, then cortisol goes back down to normal. The anxiety goes away. But if you're being chased by a tiger all the time, cortisol goes back up. It affects your appetite because the hypothalamus is directly related to that, and affects your pituitary, but also affects your hormones. So it's that triad that's very important to get back into balance. And the way to do that is many of the things that we've talked about is getting into parasympathetic, changing one's diet, having adequate protein, good quality fats as well, and finding a way to do exercise. Mm-hmm. Exercise can be hard for people that are flatlined. I don't recommend they get the heart rate over 90, but if they can gradually perhaps take a walk and do some gratitude every day and just to watch around the house of things that they're happy with, even in the pandemic.
Right.
I have food on my table. I have my family is safe. I'm going to find creative ways. I'm a ballroom dancer, and there was no ballroom or not much ballroom dancing. So I had mirrors put in my basement, and a ballet bar, and a big screen TV, so I can dance. Right. So you have to get creative about what you need to do to take care of yourself, but it is absolutely imperative now more than ever before.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And, one of the things that is really great to summarize for our listeners is exactly what you said. All of the things that we are discussing are going to help heal the adrenal function. It's going to help get the adrenals working the way that our bodies are naturally supposed to work. And our bodies are just such a miraculous piece of machinery, right? We just give it the right ingredients, give it the right nutrients, give it the right environment, give it the right sympathetic sort of tone. And our bodies can really just go into this healing mechanism where it can do all that work. We just have to support it with the right foods, with the right exercise, with the right movement, the gratitude. I always tell my patients, start your day with listing at least 5 to 10 things that you're grateful for, because it puts you in a very different energetic field. And when you're in a positive energetic field, your entire body responds to it completely differently. Your molecules, your mitochondria, everything responds very differently when you are surrounded by that positivity. So those are some great ways that you've mentioned to be able to heal the adrenal glands and the adrenal function. We spoke about, women's sex hormones, right? Because again, our specialties, of course, our specialty is OB-GYN, and that's where we started off. Of course, now I see a lot of men in my practice, and a lot of men listen to what you say as well. So what about men's hormones, testosterone and adrenals? Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's not leave them out of it.
Well, what's interesting is that men's testosterone levels have gone down. Free testosterone has gone down 50% in the last 20 years.
Yes.
And, the reason for that is, unfortunately, we have a lot of toxicity in our environment, and we have a lot of what we call estrogen disruptors, which means the microwave oven that we use with the plastic containers, the plastic bottles that we use, the shaving creams that we use on our face for men, the products that women use on their faces, that's affecting our hormones. Mm-hmm. And when testosterone levels go down, what we start to notice is a big belly on the men. And we see lots and lots of men with big bellies, and including, unfortunately, erectile dysfunction that comes with that territory as well. Mm-hmm. So for men, it also can be driven by stress. And many men are not great about talking about how they feel. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that gets kept inside close to their chest because they don't want to, they don't want to be whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that affects their, sex hormones as well. So, and it also affects their sense of sexuality. So it's a huge issue as a culture, especially with regards to toxicity for men. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things that needs to be addressed because we have an epidemic of men with ED. And we have an epidemic of men that have low testosterone levels that are causing major health problems, including heart disease, because there's an association between testosterone, of course, muscle, that's a part of it, but it's heart disease. It's a health issue.
It is.
Because we want our men to be strong and healthy until they, the day they die.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. Just last week, we did I had a wonderful guest on my podcast. Dr. Gio, you probably know Dr. Gio Espinoza, works a lot with, he's a functional urologist, and we talked exactly about that and the misperception that is out there that testosterone leads to heart disease, where it's absolutely opposite of that. Now, we're talking about healthy testosterone levels, optimal testosterone levels. Too much of nothing is good, and I want to make that point very clear, whether it's estrogen, progesterone in women or testosterone, DHEA, or in men. But we want to be balanced, we want to be optimal, and we want to remember that, when I talked about this whole symphony orchestra, I always say the conductor of the symphony is your adrenals, because without the adrenals, nothing's going to play right, whether it be your thyroid, sex hormones, or anything in between. I also want to just kind of remind the audience that, when you do go to your practitioner the next time, and if they say, I'm going to check your thyroid, make sure they're checking all of the things we mentioned, including TSH, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and all the thyroid antibodies, in addition to vitamin D levels and several other things that we're talking about in a lot of these podcasts. So very, very important point that you made, Marcelle. In men, we've got to realize it's a health issue. It's not just a libido issue or a muscle mass issue. It's a long-term health issue to prevent chronic diseases.
Absolutely.
Another thing I love about your work is you talk a lot about food being a powerful tool for healing. Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food, right? We learned about that back hundreds of years ago, right? 400 BC. In your experience, how can food help the adrenals specifically heal? And what might be someone's top 2 or 3 steps to approach nutrition as a healing modality?
What I say to people is food is the most powerful drug we have. And as I see in my practice, if I can get somebody to change their diet, I can get rid of 85% of their symptoms. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And if I can get them to do the dietary changes and change their attitude, because we know that what we think, as we think, so goes our life, they will have remarkable changes in their health. Mm-hmm. And we have to take baby steps. Years ago, I thought there was one diet that fit everyone, and it's not true. I think it's absolutely not true. Keto is fantastic for some. Mm-hmm. Lower fat's better for some. Mm-hmm. Mediterranean's better for some, and balanced is better for some. But the bottom line is most all of the diets are about half of the plate is gorgeous colored vegetables. Right. And then we still need protein, healthy quality fats, and some people increased amounts of carbohydrates. But for adrenals, I tend to get the carb load down. And I tend to suggest sometimes intermittent fasting works for some, and for some it doesn't. But if they're really insulin resistant, I'm going to be doing lower on the carbs, organic, or no artificial colors, sweeteners, dyes, no processed foods that they can prepare quickly for themselves and their family, foods that they love and enjoy, that they sit down at the table and they go, yum, this is great. And they also take a moment before they start eating and a moment after they finish. They don't have arguments, they don't have discussions, they don't watch TV when it's kind of rowdy, especially during these times, and that they allow the body to digest the food properly. They bless the food, they have a prayer, that whatever makes you happy, but that they really allow their digestive system to absorb the nutrients in this amazing meal that they're creating for themselves. And that women are terrible about, I can't have this, I shouldn't have that, I'm on this diet, I'm on that diet. And we need to stop that and find out what the body needs and start asking her so that she really is able to support the physiology of the body. And then everything can change. Everything can change because the body has its own kind of chemical lab inside. And if we give it the right nutrients, it comes out with this amazing, amazing outside. And our skin is affected by what we eat. Everything's affected by it.
What a great summary. I loved everything you said about food and customization, personalization. Don't try to do this bad diet or that bad diet. It's so important to truly listen to your body, like you said. I think it is sort of a universal truth, though, that there are some very known inflammatory foods, right? I mean, when you look at processed foods and chemicals and everything that, comes in boxes instead of in the freezer. I always tell my patients, your pantry should be pretty much empty and your freezer and refrigerator should be almost full. And if you kind of live by that, where it's just fresh, organic, colorful, and really just healing foods. And when you look at the food, it's much like looking at water. And we've kind of all heard the studies that have been done with water. And if you take a pitcher of water and you actually bless on it or say loving words to it, how the chemical and molecular structure of water just miraculously changes, versus you take a pitcher and you say negative statements to this pitcher of water and it doesn't become healing anymore. Similarly with food, if you're going to curse this food that you're trying to eat, which is going into your body to heal your body, how do you expect it to heal your body? So amazing pointers, especially with, being on the table together, enjoying what you're going to eat, and use that as a very healing time and a healing mechanism. So I'm really glad you brought that up. A lot of my patients, when I see them, a lot of them, unfortunately, don't have a very healthy eating pattern. And so I start them on my favorite 14-day mild detoxification, where they're really eliminating all the toxic, processed, inflammatory foods. And if you can do that for about 21 days, you can do anything, right? It takes 21 days to build a habit. If you can do that for 21 days, hydrate your body, get your body into this flow of eating the right foods, you're golden. After that, you feel so good that nobody wants to go back to eating poorly again. Don't you find that? Like, people feel so good if they just do it for 14 to 21 days. They're like, oh my God, you're my favorite person. It's just great. So food is definitely very, very important. I want to say in your book, you mention historical stress. Now, we talked a little bit about trauma. So I want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit. What is historical stress and how does it affect your adrenal glands and your current day stress?
So historical stress is really stress that we had when we're younger. And the body doesn't know the difference between present day stress and past stress. And the unfortunate part about that, as I mentioned with the ACE study, is that it changes our biochemistry. So the more cortisol we have, the rubber band, that gets pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled, at some point that rubber band's going to break. So what I say to my patients is, if you don't deal with your story, whatever that story is, your story deals with you. And it might oftentimes comes at menopause, when women's kind of lives are changing and their hormones are shifting, their adrenals are really needing to come into play a little bit more. And what happens then is that we start to see the breakdown happening. We start to see cortisol's really shifting. We start to see that they can't sleep. They've got, agitation. They're feeling angry in their relationships and things like that. That's oftentimes because there's been things that I call shoved under the carpet that never really got dealt with. It happened yesterday. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It matters. It matters. We now have research to really show that as you work through that, it changes your biochemistry. So as you work through that historical stressor that may have been there, for example, if you grew up with a parent that was perhaps a rageaholic, let's talk, nothing ever happened. It was just that moment of, you walk through the door and you're kind of looking to see what kind of mood is he in tonight. Mm-hmm. And you then are always on high alert. And as you go into a job and you have somebody that's similar, your body doesn't know the difference and has the same amygdala, which is the primitive brain response, mm-hmm. as you did before. And all of those things drive our hormones down a different way, our thyroid down a different way. And ultimately, if you've had too much stress for too long, it absolutely suppresses the immune system and increases autoimmune disorders.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The immune system is something that we're all very, very in tune with right now, especially with the global crisis and the pandemic. We all want to be stronger immune-wise, right? We don't want to succumb to what's going on. And unfortunately, so many people are being affected by this. So I'm super glad that you mentioned that stress and immunity are very intricately related and directly related. I do want to also talk a little bit about sleep, stress, immunity, as well as what are some of your favorite supplements? What are some of your favorite nutrients that you feel are really awesome to support the adrenal gland, sleep, as well as the immune function?
If somebody has difficulty falling asleep and there's no other reason that we can kind of find, oftentimes it's cortisol's up at night. So if we're using something like phosphatidylserine can be very helpful. Making sure that you wear appropriate, the glasses, if you're sitting in front of your computer, you turn your computer off. That we have what I call technology, days off or fasts. So several times a week, you don't even look at your smartphone, your computer, and things like that if you're able to do that. In addition to that, I use ashwagandha. I love that as a wonderful supportive for the adrenals. Cordyceps rhodiola. If somebody is very low in cortisol, I use licorice and licorice extracts that can be very helpful as well as making sure you've got a multi and fish oil on board and vitamin C and especially now quercetin and zinc. Those are very, very important nutrients. And making sure that you have good quality fats, because if you don't have good quality fats in your diet, it makes it much more likely that you're going to stay insulin resistant. And we really, really don't want that to happen, so we can get insulin kind of back on board as your friend instead of your foe. Okay. And then using nutrition. And also one of the things we didn't talk about was oxytocin. And that's the bonding love hormone. And if we don't have enough of that in our lives, it also contributes to dis-ease and unhealth, especially when it comes to adrenals. So it's the whole gamut of those things is how we heal. The right diet, the right thoughts, the right attitude, the right environment, and the good quality supplements, because they can make the world of difference. But a lot of people think, well, I'll just take my supplements and I'll be fine. The answer is no, you won't, because you're going to be right back on our doorstep again, because we're not healing the problem that started to begin with.
Right. Really getting into the root cause of how you ended up with the symptomatology that you might be, dealing with at this point. And you and I both know when patients come to us, we are absolutely going into the root cause approach. That's sort of what we do. We look at the symptoms, but we want to see what is the root cause that might have gotten you here to begin with. And let's start peeling that off, whether it be the emotional trauma, whether it be the stress that you're experiencing right now, whether it be the negative self-talk that you might be doing, or all of that is on you and you're just taking it on yourself because you have this superwoman complex that I know both of us know a little bit about, right? And we're just not, and it's not a good thing anymore. We used to all think, oh yeah, I want to be no, it's not a good thing, because ultimately it is something that causes dis-ease in the body, because our bodies were not meant to be unkind to itself. We were meant to be kind to ourselves in addition to being kind to others we love. But truly, the oxygen mask needs to go on ourselves before we can try to be that superhuman for anybody else, right? And women are just, they're known for this. They're known for this caregiver complex and the superwoman complex, and it truly is not good for us. And I'm glad we spoke about the supplements because a lot of people don't know what they should do. So definitely start with lifestyle measures. Start with everything we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes, your diet, your exercise, your mental attitude, your gratitude, your silence, your sleep, detoxification, getting rid of the toxic products. My Greenfields is a wonderful company that, makes a lot of great products. There's a lot that we can do to just get rid of all the bad and bring in the good. And really the good should also be customized, like you said. So we, in functional medicine, we guide our patients to do this so that they can have a very personalized approach. You've just done an awesome job, Marcelle, talking about so many wonderful things with the adrenal gland and with stress that directly impacts people today. So I thank you for all that amazing information. I'd love some parting words, some words of wisdom that you want to say to the community about your work or about wonderful things that you might be offering.
So people can certainly find more about me at marcellepick.com. I have a large website with many articles, 1,400 articles at least. And I have 3 books that they can get on Amazon: The Core Balanced Diet, Is It Me and My Hormones, and Is It Me and My Adrenals. And also have a weight loss program. It's called the Women's Transformation Center.com. So we've got lots of options for people. And I guess my parting words are, this is a very stressful time for everybody. And learning how to still come from heart is going to be so important because we're very polarized now, and that's not going to help anybody. And learning to take care of yourself in spite of the kind of, many people describe it as a war zone around them, but they find ways to really still go quiet. Even if they did 7-7-7 breathing, you inhale for 7, you hold for 7, you exhale for 7, twice a day. It's a start. Yeah. And learning, how to cook some delicious meals that maybe don't take very long, 20 minutes to cook this amazing meal. It's all possible. And we can't change our surroundings, but we can change how we conduct our thoughts and what we do ourselves.
Yes. So definitely you can change your reaction to anybody else's actions. So with that, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom. It's always a joy to hear all of your wonderful advice and pieces of wisdom. And I think we share a lot as well as our passion for women's health. So from one sister to the other, thank you again. And best of luck with everything that you do because you do so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for making time for today's podcast with Get Well with Dr. Shel. I know that this conversation and education can help you to create your best life possible on every level. So definitely tune in to hear the newest expert and learn the latest protocols to support your best health journey. You can learn more about me and my wellness center at drshel.com, drshel.com, and I hope that you will make time to come visit us in the Houston area to take a deep dive on self-care. My team and I are completely devoted to helping you live a better life from this moment forward. The best days of your life are ahead of you, I promise. This podcast is a powerful and simple way to carry the wisdom of thought leaders from around the world in your pocket and continue to develop your own healing journey every single day. So let the journey begin.